Hey guys, this is Chris Schwartz-Edmisten with Schwartz-Edmisten Website Design. Today I'm going to be covering the best way to do fade-in scroll animations. So you can see here I set up a fictional construction site, and as I scroll down the page, elements are fading into view. So right now the go-to tutorial for this, implementing it on Squarespace websites, is this tutorial right here by Nicolo Miranda. And it's a pretty good tutorial, but it doesn't go into very much depth, so I really want to create this tutorial to be kind of the go-to for scroll reveal and how to implement it, best practices, problems that you might run into, and how to solve those problems implementing it on Squarespace. To get started, all you have to do is just drop in the scroll reveal script tags in the header. So I'll have those in the description. Just go ahead and copy and paste it. So you want the script source coming from unpackaged.com scroll reveal, and we're targeting at version 4. And then in a new script tag, you're going to have window.sr equals scroll reveal. And so that just kind of initializes scroll reveal, and the reason we want that in the header is because we need all of this to load before our content loads. Otherwise, our content isn't going to fade in properly. So really important you load the script in the header, and then after all the content loads, then we're going to put the instructions for the content animation in the footer. So now that we have the script in the header, what we're going to do is pass the objects that we want to animate and give the instructions for each animation in that code as well. What we have to do is open a new script tag, and we're going to say sr.reveal parenthesis quotation mark, and then we're not going to fill anything in just yet, but go ahead and close that quotation mark, add a comma. We're going to add a curly bracket, and then we're going to close the curly bracket, close the parenthesis, and add a semicolon. Okay, so now within these quotation marks, we're going to be passing the objects. So for example, if we want the H1 to be animated, then we would say, okay, the welcome section H1. We would put the code for the objects that we want to animate in here. And then within the parentheses, we're going to be putting the instructions for the animation in this area. So for example, we want to animate this button. So I'm going to click Inspect Elements, and this section is the Services section. So we're going to say, okay, within the Services section, and we target IDs with a hashtag. Within the Services section, we want to target this button, and button blocks get a button block class. So within the services section, we want to target the button block class, and let's just save it. We're not going to give it any specific instructions right now. We'll just see what happens to it with the default when you don't define anything. Okay, so as we scroll down the page, you can see the button just faded in. Cool, but we can make it a little more interactive in terms of the animation. So I'm now going to paste in all of the properties that can be defined and customized. Okay, so I've pasted in all the properties that can be customized, and I just want to run through each one of them really quickly. So for origin, that just means where the element is going to be animated from. So you can put in a value of bottom, top, left, or right. Distance is just the distance that the element is going to be animated from. So you can put in any valid CSS distance, like pixels, percentage, rems, etc. So I prefer using pixels. The duration is just how long the animation is going to take, and this is in milliseconds. So 500 milliseconds, for example, would be half of a second. You can animate rotation. I would not recommend that you do this. I think it would look pretty cheesy as the user scrolls down the page and things are like rotating into view. So we're actually just going to get rid of that one, but it can be done. Opacity, The default is 0. It's the animation starts at 0 opacity. I don't know why you would need anything else but 0, so we don't really even have to worry about that one either. Scale, the default scales in at 1. If you want, for example, your button to like start small and then scale up and in, sort of for like a zooming in effect, then you can set it to something lower than 1 and it will animate to 1. But I don't really want anything to be zooming in, so I'm just going to delete scale as well. The easing, you can set any valid CSS easing property too. You can define a custom one here with cubic Bezier, but it also will take ease, ease in, ease out, linear, anything like that. I prefer to use ease for easing. For mobile, this just means whether the animations will appear on mobile or not. If you set it to true, then the animations will appear on mobile. If you set it to false, then they won't appear on mobile. I think it's a little safer to set it to false personally, just because with mobile devices, sometimes they just behave differently than on desktop. So just to be safe, I like to not use scroll reveal animations on mobile. Reset. This means whether the animation is going to happen more than once. So if reset is set to false, then the animation will only appear the first time that you load the page and scroll that element into view. And then if you scroll out of view and into view again, you can see the animation is not repeating. But if we set reset to true, then every time that element scrolls into view, the animation is going to occur. So I scroll out and it animates in, and then I scroll back up and it animates in again. So I'm going to keep it to true for the purposes of this tutorial because it's easier just to show the animations over and over again. I would probably recommend keeping this at false, just because as a user scrolling down the page and tons of elements are animating into view, you don't really want to overwhelm them, which it can be. So I would just have them animate in the first time and then leave it at that. The view factor, this is a percentage, and so 0.2 would be 20%, and that just means 20% of the element. Once 20% of the element is in view, then the animation will start. So you can set this, the default is 20%, but you can set that to like a higher value, and then more of that element will have to be in the browser window, in the viewport window, in order for the animation to start. So that's a cool property to be able to adjust. Okay, so now we have our properties customized. Before we move on, I want to make a couple real quick changes to these settings. I'm actually going to set the mobile to true because I want you guys to see what the animation looks like on mobile. For the duration, I want it to be a full second. I want it to take a little bit longer, and for the distance, I want it to be 50 pixels. So I'm going to save that, and then we can see what that looks like for the button. So I think that's a cool, for a fade-in animation effect, up and in, I think that those are all good values. So what if we want other elements to inherit this same animation? All we have to do is find their class in our code. So for example, I want all of these, this collection of blocks, this collection of blocks, and this collection of blocks, all to fade up and in on scroll, just like the button is. So all I have to do is find a class that all of these elements share. And just having worked a lot in Squarespace, I know that the layout engine works on a column system. So the full width of the page gets a class of SQS column 12. And so if I have 3 blocks side by side, I know that each of those blocks gets a class of Squarespace column 4, SQS column 4. So you can see if I hover over this block, SQS column 4, same with the middle block and same with the end block. So if I target this SQS column 4 class, then each of these blocks are going to inherit that same animation. So this is a cool way to target chunks of blocks using the classes from the Squarespace layout engine. So all I have to do is add a comma behind my last element that I'm targeting and add the new class that I want to inherit this animation. And if I save that, you guys will see that, cool, those blocks are now animating into frame. So I love scroll reveal for this reason. We don't have to copy and paste this whole chunk of code for each new element that we want to target, all we have to do is separate them by commas up here. So it's a really great way to keep the code pretty light. And so it looks like all of these blocks are animating together, but actually they're animating independently. They're just entering the viewport at the same time. So this is why I wanted to keep mobile view on. If I switch to mobile view, you see as I scroll down, they're all going to animate in independently one at a time. So that looks really cool on mobile. Okay, so what if I wanted these blocks down here, for example, to have a different animation? I don't want them to come from the bottom, I want them to come from the left. So what we can do is copy this chunk of code and paste it down below, and then because I know those two blocks are side by side, I know that they get a class of .sqs column 6. So I'm just going to enter in that class there, and I'm going to change the origin from bottom to left. And now both the image and the text blocks are going to enter in from the left and animate to the middle. Okay, so if I click save, and I scroll down the page, those blocks are animating in from the left. So that looks great. But now our code is getting pretty chunky, and it's unnecessarily chunky because you can see everything but the origin, every setting but the origin that I'm defining is the same. So what we can do to cut down on our code is we can actually define global custom values up here in our header. And then for each block that we want to have unique code, we can just define that unique value down here. So I'll show you that real quick. I'm going to cut all of those elements. In between our parentheses, I'm going to add an opening curly bracket. I'll space down twice, and then I'll add a closing curly bracket. And in between, I'm going to add those global values. So now every sr.reveal block of code that I define down here is going to inherit these values. So I don't have to specify them down below. I can just only have my unique values. So you can see that's a great way to cut down on code as well, and just define custom values or specific values to these elements down below in the footer code. So if I save that, you'll see it's going to be exactly the same, but we were able to cut our code in half, which is pretty cool. And I'll show you how it keeps it unique. Let's say that I want these blocks, everything that I defined with origin bottom, I also want it to scale up and in. So I'll set a scale to something like 0.3 and add a comma, and you'll see that everything's going to start at 30% of its normal scale and then scale up and in. Cool, just like that. But then because I didn't define it down here for this block of code, it doesn't inherit that property. So really cool way to define unique properties for certain elements. So I don't want that, so I'm going to delete that. That was just an example. So now let's look at how to get a little more fancy with our targeting in our animations. So I want the image to come in from the left and this text block to come in from the right. And then as I scroll down, I want this text box to also come in from the left and this image to come in from the right. So we have to get a little more fancy with our targeting, but there's a really cool way that we can do this using the nth child selector. So I'll show you how to do that. All we have to do is target our odd nth childs and give it the animation coming in from the left, and then we're going to target even nth childs coming in from the right. So if we go to .sqs column 6 and we give it an nth child, and then in parentheses we're going to say odd and close those parentheses. And now we're going to duplicate this code and we're going to say nth child even, and we want our nth child evens of SQS column 6 coming in from the right. Now I'm going to save this and you're going to see that we have achieved the animation that we want. Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. These blocks over here are coming from the left, and these blocks over here are coming from the right. And that works because we're targeting our SQS column 6 class, and we're saying, okay, we want all odds. So this is child 1, child 2, child 3, and child 4. So we know all odds are going to be on the left and all evens are going to be on the right. So we're just saying, okay, all odd children, let's come in from the left, and all even children, let's come in from the right. So, for example, this is going to keep going if I'm going to keep adding blocks to this section. So I'll add a spacer block like before, and now I want an image on the left to keep with this design, and I'll just add whatever. Okay, and then I want to add a text block on the right, and I'm going to have blah blah blah, make that H2, and then I'll add another text blocks below it, and this will just be blah 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 blah. Great. Okay, so now I've added my new layout here, and the great thing is that those blocks are now going to inherit that animation. Let's just reload the frame real quick since we added more content. Fades in. And you can see my new blocks inherited that same property because they still have these same classes of .sqs column 6, and this is also an odd child, so it's coming in from the left, and this is an even child, so it's coming in from the right. So a really cool way to target all elements within a section and have them inherit these same animation properties. So I really encourage you guys to do some research into like advanced selecting of elements with CSS, because there's a lot of cool, pretty advanced selectors, and you can get really cool animations like this if you just take some time to learn them. So really recommend just start Googling like advanced selectors CSS, and you should find some cool content. There's a problem that can happen. Let's say that I want this header to have this fade in property. So it's in the header is in the welcome section, so I'm going to go to, actually I just want all my headers to do that. So I'm just going to add a comma and go H1 because I want it to inherit that animation. If I save, you can see as it loads, it like loads normal and then it inherits the animation. So it has like a flash or like a flicker effect. Okay, I'm going to reload it again. Yeah, so it has that flicker effect, which looks really bad. So there is something that we can do to fix that. I'm going to show you guys that right now. So it's a little bit of code that we need. It has to go below the script tag because we're going to add a style. We're going to basically hide all the elements, and then once the animation starts, we're going to have them fade in. But initially when the page loads, all these elements are going to be hidden. So it's an extra step, but it ensures that nothing goes wrong with the page load and you never get that flickering effect. So what's happening is basically when the page loads, an SR class is getting attached to HTML, and when that happens, we can define our elements that we have down here and give them a visibility of hidden upon page load, and then once this animation takes over, it's going to take it from hidden to visible. So if that might not have made a ton of sense, but I'm going to show you an example right now of how we can get this H1 to stop flickering. So basically we have html.sr, and we're just going to add our H1, and we're going to save it, and you will see that there's no longer a flickering effect. Pretty cool. And I'll reload it again just to show you. So that gets rid of the flicker. So now to ensure that nothing flickers, all we have to do is add a comma, and then for each element we just define each element under the parent of this html.sr container. So we have an .sqs column 4 that we're animating in, so we'll do html.sr slash .sqs call 4, and then we're also animating in this button block. So we're going to want to add an html.sr for that button block, and then the last one that we have to do is the .sqs column 6. So I'm going to copy that first, and .sqs column 6. Okay, so now all of them upon page load are getting a visibility hidden, but then once the animation kicks in, then they're getting revealed. With this, you will never get flickering, which is awesome. It doesn't matter if the page gets hung up loading or anything, the actual element itself will never load, will never flash before the animation kicks in. Thank you guys for watching. I know this was a crazy long tutorial, but I hope it helped you implement scroll reveal on your Squarespace website. Please subscribe to my channel. I'm brand new, but I'm going to have tons of Squarespace tutorials and just web design tutorials in general coming up on my channel. So I'm going to have tons more content for you. Thanks.